Hello, everyone. It's been a while. Sorry for the delay, but I am Mystery.
I am Bolton Mortimer, the Authenticator. We are coming to you on a day we would not normally be coming to you because we decided that rather than play phone tag every Wednesday because something would invariably come up, we would just do it the day we could agree to do it, and then hopefully that would prevent the SpongeBob time card syndrome of so much later the old narrator got tired of waiting and they had to hire a new one because it was getting there.
Yeah, but we're talking about men and reproduction because Dalton told me about some new technology that's being developed regarding artificial wombs, I believe it was.
Yes. And I felt like we needed to talk about it because underneath the dystopia flavored evil, there is potential, in my opinion, for positive outcomes to come from this. And this is largely because I consider artificial wombs to be kind of the one of the biggest frontiers in men's rights issues because women back in the 70s or so got access to in vitro fertilization and, of course, test tube babies and abortion and basically and birth control and everything else. And men in the realm of reproductive rights have Jack Diddley squat pretty much, or at least their rights have not improved since the 70s like women's did. Thus, I feel like artificial wombs would be a nice way of actually being equalitarian and also rather than taking rights away from women, which no one would let us do even if we wanted to, it actually gives men more rights than they currently have, and hopefully some kind of equilibrium would emerge in a world where both men and women could, with a little finagling, have children of their own without anyone else's say so. And again, I do want to stress that the people
Well, I
who
can't
are
agree.
funding this want dystopian shit for it, but just because they want to do dystopian shit for it, A, doesn't mean they will succeed, and B, doesn't mean that someone later might find a better use for this technology, as per, you know, the people that put us on the moon were people who used to work for the Nazis, and many, many medical advances were made in the 20th century that would make any mad scientist of any fictional universe blush. And yet, positive
While
outcomes
I
were still managed to
do
be
agree that there's
dragged from
potential
it.
for the technology, um, I do have some concerns, uh, biological and social. Well, first of all, biologically, we know that unborn babies get the benefit of their mother's immune system while they're in the womb. Are they gonna be able to get the same benefit in these artificial wombs? Is something that I was wondering about, and also that I believe that natural breast milk is better for developing babies than store bought formula. I mean, I know a lot of people use formula nowadays, but it's still natural is better. My concern is that with this technology, there are certain benefits to the human element of the uh, gestation process that I fear might be lost with this artificial system.
I mean, that's a fair point, and that's definitely something they should consider while making the damn things. But my thing is, I just see too much potential for actual pro- progress in a way that that's supposed to mean to kick the idea out of bed just because it's not perfect at the moment. Um, because, for example, people who are infertile, this could be their chance to conceive biologically connected children. People who are same-sex couples, this could be a chance for them to conceive children they're biologically connected to. I mean, as much as adoption is a good thing, and I definitely think it should still exist. At the end of the day, there's something there's something irreplaceable about having children who are biologically an extension of you. And both infertile people and same-sex couples, other than possibly, finagling a surrogate, which has its own issues, because now we're getting complete asshole gay people who are like, we're entitled to surrogates. No, you're not. Find one who actually would consent to it on their own. God damn you. But point being,
Yeah,
I see that.
that's just
Yeah,
insane.
yeah. I'm speaking as a gay guy myself. Like, I'm all in favor of surrogates. In fact, before I learned about this artificial womb thing, that was how I was intending to eventually have children. If I do eventually have children, is me and my partner find a surrogate, and then we each impregnate them once, and therefore we have one child that's mine, one child that's his, and they're still technically brothers. That was my solution to this problem. But given the possibility of the artificial womb, both as a men's rights advocate and a gay man, I can't help but look at this and go, A, this would equalize the men's rights and women's rights thing that has been unequal for 50 years, and it being unequal has helped no one and hurt many, many, many dozens of people. So, I'm despite the fact that the people behind this idea are currently the most evil motherfuckers on the planet, cough, cough, Klaus Schwab, cough. Um, many, many good technologies have arisen out of people's horrifying dystopian ideas. And I think this might be one of those cases.
Before I started thinking of the potential benefits for the technology, when I first heard about an artificial womb being created, my very first thought was the pods from the Matrix, you know, where Neo wakes up and he's got
Yeah,
all
they
these,
even look like them, and that was
wires and
probably
things
a
connected
horrible
to all the
marketing
wires.
choice.
But yeah, I definitely see how this could help people. But as I mentioned, my concerns would be the potential loss of benefits. Also, do you worry that children may have a psychological response to the fact that they were raised in an artificial womb? Because we're seeing people have psychological responses to like a lot of things that have emerged due to technology in the last couple of years, like social media, like something as big of an impact on the human race is having massive influence.
I mean, I don't think that this would psychologically affect children any more than being a test tube baby currently would, which I've never heard of any children regretting being born simply because they were, for colloquially termed, a test tube baby. So I'm not sure. It's possible there might be some unique element to this, which fair enough if there is, and that's something we'll have to we'll have to deal with when we come to it, because unlike some people, I'm not a utopian. I just think there are obvious ways we could improve the world, and I think avoiding them for the sake of not being utopian is just as silly as everything will be perfect someday because utopian thinking. Like, we can't improve the world because otherwise we're being utopian. What about all those other ways we improved the world previously that weren't in any way delusional, naive, or utopian? Like, that's a bit like saying we can't end slavery because to end slavery would be a utopian pipe dream that would never happen. That's No, I refuse that logic. That logic is false. Um, but like I say, as I'm not a utopian, I do acknowledge there will probably be a transition phase whereby the technology is still in its infancy and we'll have to work out some of the kinks. Is it a bit higher risk because this is people's lives we're talking about? Sure, but the same learning curve happened with in vitro fertilization and with other test tube baby shenanigans, and we eventually figured it out, and it didn't take as long as everyone thought it would. So I'm hoping that this technology will be similar in its uh, advancement, and we will have a very short period of issues with this. And I don't think it's implausible to think that will happen, especially with all the money and resources being pumped into it by said nefarious actors.
Don't I just thought of something. There could be legal implications for this because in the law, when there's a dispute over children, the law usually favors the birth
The
mother.
mother.
But
Yeah.
with this technology, there would be no birth mother.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that women say, especially in regards to children, is that they have a greater connection with them than men do because they carried them for 9 months. This will remove that entirely.
Yes. Another possible positive of this, because as we know, the family court and the divorce court are fucked beyond all reason in relation to men's rights issues. It's not just Johnny Depp,
So
folks. It's not just,
this could be
the rich and famous. It's everyone.
better. Though I wonder if this is going to put into dispute who has greater claims over the child. Like say you conceive a child this way, and then you get divorced or you end up splitting up. Like, how is this going to be fought out in the courts?
Honestly, I could see a situation where it basically forces them to be more egalitarian, which I wouldn't be not in favor of because, of course, like we said, the I play the woman card and therefore I automatically win issue in divorce courts is just a travesty that needs to be something needs to be done about that I play the woman card therefore I win thing. And this is I think this is the most sane way of doing that, because the other option is roll back all the reforms made since like the 60s to the family courts.
That would
And
be my.
yeah, not only do I find that to be impractical, I find that to be the wrong way of going about it. I think I keep getting reminded of this one Honey Badger cartoon created by Dr. Anna McCam, where one character is a poodle with a bazooka, and she keeps walking up to people and insisting that they look into her bazooka, and then another character comes along and tries to sell the people who don't have bazookas so as to make it at least equal and not be terrorized by this poodle character. And everyone looks at the person selling the bazookas and say, "How dare you sell anyone but her a bazooka?" And I kind of the obvious joke is that the bazooka represents rights, and I'm on the side that says rather than roll back people's rights or at least people's legal privileges that we've fought long and hard to obtain, we could just extend these privileges as much as possible to the people who don't have them, and then it's everyone has a bazooka rather than only one side or one set of people having a bazooka. Because one set of people having a bazooka is tyranny. Everyone having a bazooka is either mutually assured destruction or more likely just people learning to fucking cooperate with each other. But I don't favor the let's take away everyone's bazookas approach, because I know enough of history to know that that doesn't work either.
If you implement a policy that ends up having disastrous consequences, wouldn't the right thing be to remove said bad policy?
If the problem is with the policy itself and not with how it's distributed, sure, but I find that in most cases the problem of the sexual revolution is that only half of the human race was invited to participate. I think the responsible thing to do now is do with the coming century, or the century we are currently in, for men what we did for women in the previous one. That way everyone is on equal footing and everyone's quality of life is improved, rather than one set of people's quality of life being improved in the short term and having unnecessary consequences later, because oops, it turns out when you only give a certain amount of rights to half the population of the planet, the other half has to work harder and then everything gets fucked. Yeah.
Well, regarding the sexual revolution, like there's no putting the genie back in the bottle when it comes to things like birth control. Like, that ship has sailed. But I do think that things like no fault divorce should be repealed because it removes the entire reason to get married in the first place.
I I I can agree with you to some degree on no fault divorce. However, I think the problem there is that so many people have grown up in a world with no fault divorce that even that genie is going to be hard to put back in the bottle, because I don't because even if no fault divorce was, abolished tomorrow, the people raised in a world with it are still going to, at least for a short while, behave like it still exists, and having to clash up against that is going to make everyone's lives miserable. And I still think
Let them.
that's
I say. I say, in my opinion, let them be miserable for a short time, and then things will readjust. And then things will readjust themselves.
yeah,
Like
but I sort of
it's going to be bad in the short term, but in the long term, I genuinely think it will be better because why get married to somebody if you are going to wake up one day and just leave?
yeah. Honestly, though, I feel like that's going to get used by the social justice types as a example of, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but women's oppression, even though it's not, but it looks for all the world like it is, and then boom, we're going to be right back where we started. Because
It's only
for
women's
better or
oppression if
worse,
they
the
were
power of the
planning
woman card
on breaking up
is
their
more
marriage.
effective than the power of the men card.
It's only it's only oppression to women if women were just going to leave their husband for no reason.
Unfortunately, I
In which
think
case,
there
why
is
did
a
they even get
significant
married?
amount of people who do, and those
There
people,
is, and that's a problem.
yeah. But the problem is they have all of academia and the legal system behind them at the moment, and it's going to wind up being like the abortion thing all over again. And I don't like the problem is with the let's put everything back to the way it was approach. We've been raised in several generations of the women's oppression of history narrative. So the normies and the feminists and the extremely gynocentric traditionalists are all going to go, "How dare you get rid of no fault divorce? We women need that for, various reasons, and therefore you're oppressing them and being regressive and traditionalist by doing that." And I just that's not a fight that I think we can win at this juncture. And
I I disagree, but then again, I'm not in power, and also I don't think any of our current politicians have the spine to even attempt something like it.
no, and women are 50 or yeah, 51% of the electorate, and a lot of women,
Not all
not
women
not saying
are.
all. There's your based women and your honey badgers and so on and so forth. But the majority of women are somewhere on the gynocentric spectrum, whether it's gynocentric traditionalism or gynocentric normie bullshit, or feminism, which is basically ideological gynocentrism. So unfortunately, even just playing it as a numbers game, that's not something you can be able to. Giving men the same rights we gave to women, I think, is a much easier sell for people
I
than
think
roll back the rights and privileges we gave to women in the previous century.
I think if we're going to talk about giving men rights, one of the first rights that we should give them, specifically regarding reproduction, is to not have to pay for a child that is not his.
Yeah, legal.
You did not reproduce. You should not be on the hook for
Legal
the
paternal
child that was
surrender in
produced.
general, I think, would also be something to add to that. Like, women have safe haven. They have, putting the baby up for adoption. They have abortion. They have every power to get themselves off the hook. But men don't even get legal paternal surrender, and
I
that's
agree.
that's not fair.
I don't think men should just abandon their children. I don't agree with it morally, but if women are allowed to abort them, then at the very least, a guy should be able to just walk
Yeah,
away.
but it's not even just abortion. It's abortion and safe haven abandonment and adoption and, well, I just don't want them, so put them in the foster system. So there's so many options for women, and we're even getting men to step one, which is the equivalent of like safe haven abandonment, of legal paternal surrender, of it's not my child, or I didn't want it, or I wasn't consulted, or God forbid she took my sperm and impregnated herself without my knowledge, which does happen. And that's the ultimate reason why I come down on the side of legal paternal surrender, because even if it does enable the assholes, because there are asshole men, let's not pretend like that doesn't happen. Even if it does enable a few assholes, letting the men who became fathers without their consent off the hook would be, I think, on balance, a good trade-off for that. Because in
Uh,
my opinion, there are way more men who are just in a rough spot or just get hog tied into it than there are assholes who will actively abandon their children. Because most men are not assholes, despite what the vast majority of the establishment says.
I think another thing that would be good for men regarding reproduction is um, automatic um, custody rights. Like if a man is the father of that child and he wants to be a part of that child's life, he should have the absolute right to be a part of it.
Yeah, like I think default 50-50 custody would be a good thing, but at the same at the same time, I'm not sure that's a battle that it's possible to win. I even think that legal paternal surrender would be an easier battle to win than 50-50 custody. Unfortunately, I'm not saying I'm not by any means saying it's a sane state of affairs, but I think to some degree, because we are men's rights advocates, we're already playing the human rights game on hard mode, and we're already rolling the boulder uphill, as it were. So we have to keep that in mind when we do these kind of things. It
Regarding
shouldn't
this
be hard
specific
mode. It should be just as easy as the other mode. But here we are, gynocentric species. What you gonna do?
regarding this specific area, I recently watched a news report today about a man who was having a relationship with a woman who he later found out was married, and he got her pregnant. Biologically, the kid is his, but the woman is raising the child with her husband and denying him access. And women all the time talk about deadbeat fathers and fathers who don't care for their children. This is a man who is fighting desperately to be a part of his child's life, and the woman is doing everything she can to prevent it.
Yeah, and once again, here's door number two of that phenomena. How many men have been hogtied into staying with an abusive woman because she played the I got pregnant card, regardless of whether he consented to that pregnancy at all, or whether she even came by his seed, by way of sex or by way of, I saved his condom from the last time and got myself pregnant that way. Because a lot of men are basically blackmailed into
I
staying with
think that
women they don't want to be with because
I personally think that the woman who does that should be arrested and go to jail, and the child be given to
yeah,
the man, or if the man doesn't want to be a father, given to the foster care system. Well, because the foster care system is very difficult, but would the child really be better off with a mother that only had them as a tool to extract resources
yeah,
from some man?
it's it's also this niggling little problem of let's say the father does want to get the mother pregnant, and then the mother decides, nah, I'm just gonna abort it. And the father wants to be a father, the father wants her not to abort it, but he doesn't get a vote because, her body, her choice. Never mind that it's his, biological material that's at least half of that child. But what? How many men that had already gone through the documented like neurological and hormonal changes of fatherhood got told, well, you took too long to decide whether you wanted it, or you didn't tell me that you wanted it, or I just don't care that you want it, so I aborted it without telling you. Neat. That's that is also
I
a
think
thing that happens far more often than it should. While we're on this
you're right.
topic,
You're absolutely right. And if a man is willing to take care of the child as a single dad, I don't think the woman should be allowed to abort it, because what is your reason for aborting it? You don't want to raise it. You're not going to raise it. The man is going to raise it. You can walk away.
yeah, like it's not
But I've
you are free to hand him the child and go, I never want to see the child again. Fuck off and part
I have
ways.
heard the argument that the government would be demanding the use of somebody's body for someone else, and that shouldn't be allowed. However, I would make the argument that by demanding child support, they are making a man use his body for the sake of somebody else.
For
Because
labor for
what
18
is
years at least.
yeah,
Yeah.
think about what is labor? Labor is portions of our lives that we expend in exchange for resources. We're then giving that resources to someone else, for a child that we may not even want to be a part of. But we are forced to shave off sections of our lives in order to pay for it. We have to
And
do
on
that for like what, 18, 20 years? They only have to put up with it for 9 months.
also, while we're on this particular, work as selling your soul bit by bit topic, we also should probably point out the gender lifespan gap, because men generally um, live for 4 years less than women on average. And I would argue that the reason for that is because men do more physically demanding jobs, and essentially they sell their soul, or at least 4 years of their lives, for whatever extra money they get as a result of that extremely hard labor. It's funny that feminists and gynocentric women go on and on and on about my wage gap, and they don't consider that A, men most often spend money on women and children, and not themselves, and um, B, the reason why men make more money is because their jobs are more taxing, be it psychologically, be it physically, be it just, in terms of hours and amount of effort put in. And as a result of that extra 30%, if you believe the wage gap statistics, they sell 4 years of their lives. 4 years out of 80 is just cut from a man's life, and he only gets an extra 30% added to his paycheck as a result of it when you get right down to the numbers.
Also, when you consider that women spend like 80% of the money earned, he may not even be getting to spend the money that he earned himself.
Yeah, because again, as I previously pointed out, where do men spend their money? They spend their money on their wives and families, and very often they don't even get that far. They just give their wives the paycheck and is like, here, look after the children and the homestead and all the various consumer shopping goods and so forth. And that's also not a modern invention either. That's how it's worked for as long as there's been a consistent middle class workforce. It's pretty much been, here, honey, take my paycheck and make all the consumer decisions.
I mean, also you have to consider that a lot of the times child support payments for men can be so high that the man is living basically in poverty because he doesn't have enough money to sustain himself after paying child support.
Yep.
So on top of selling off time from your life, you also like can't even have a good life with what you have left.
Yep. For your lifespan amputation in exchange for a 30% pay raise, which you're going to spend on not you anyway. You're going to give that money to the woman who makes less on paper, and then she is going to do all the shopping and the spending for the most part. That is the three-dimensional picture that never gets painted when you just look at one of these numbers. You got to look at all of the numbers in context, otherwise my wage gap means nothing. Anyway, that got off into the weeds from the reproduction topic, but the duality of men and like statistical, or the duality of men and statistics should probably be a thing at some point where we can continue talking about that.
I think it's all interrelated because reproduction is a big part of the human experience, and it affects a wide variety of areas. For example, there are a lot of men who may not want to deal with, say, modern women because a lot of women today are headaches, but they want to have children someday. They want to leave something behind. If they could use this and say get an egg from a donor and have their child born in an artificial womb, they would not need to have a relationship with a woman in order to have children of their own. Like this
Or
would fundamentally alter human relationships.
or even you don't necessarily even need a donor on some level, because we've gotten to the point where we can create blank sperm cells and blank egg cells, so you can basically have a lab grown egg or sperm, put whatever DNA you want in there. This is why I pointed out the um, same sex couples thing, because let's say you have two men who want a child, and they take one of their sperm and they pay to have a blank egg lab grown, and then they take the DNA from one of their other sperm and put it in the egg cell, and then boom, you have a child of two men
Would that
by way of
work? I
artificial womb.
mean, I
And yes, it would work
guess
the other way too for lesbians if they want a child. In case anyone's accusing me of being a male chauvinist or whatever, or wanting
well, the thing
gay
in
men.
that case is that the lesbian child would literally only be able to produce women, whereas wouldn't the men be able to produce men?
That's an interesting question. Probably actually, because men have X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, so it would depend on which section of their DNA got interlaced when they merged, just like anything else. So that actually does seem like a benefit that men would have, specifically in this situation. Although I hazard a guess that most lesbian couples would be fine with having daughters, because
Yeah,
the
I
whole
mean, I don't think that would be a problem for them. I mean, some women do want children. a son.
True. One wonders
But
eventually if we'll get to the point where we can genetically
just gets
modify one of the X's into a Y for them, but that's even further into the realm of possible science fiction here.
let me ask you something. I mentioned before, like, how would this affect human relationships if men are able to have children um, without women?
I think it would mostly just end up equalizing the women who can and do frequently have children without the direct involvement of men, be it sperm banks, be it in vitro fertilization, be it the aforementioned, experimental technology where they can literally grow a blank sperm and just insert whatever DNA they want into it. So, like, I see this as an equalization more than anything, and I think it will be used about on par with probably a little less. Although I guess it depends on the demographics, because I imagine a large percentage of people who would make use of the artificial womb are same-sex couples or infertile people. So if you throw those people who previously were not in the reproduction market into the reproduction market, that might make it used slightly more than test tube babies and in vitro fertilization. But you know what? Women had a 50-year monopoly on non-standard reproduction, so I'm more than willing to be like, no, now everyone gets to do it, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. Granted, it will also trigger the fuck out of feminists, which I will enjoy watching happen. Like
I don't honestly. I think this would empower a lot of the MGTOW guys because a lot of them from videos I've seen would like children but don't want to deal with women. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
with this
and
technology,
also
that they would be able to do that.
there is the niggling little problem of men and women the world over are becoming less fertile over time. So even outside of the convenience technology angle of the artificial womb, there may come a time where the artificial womb is even necessary. And honestly, it would enable people to be more selective of when and how they have children. Of like, let's say, it's the not too distant future, about 100 years from now, and men only have a third or so of the sperm they have now. Well, if they have the access to the artificial womb, they can literally go take one of my fertile ones, the rare fertile ones that I have, stick it in the artificial womb. 9 months later, out pops a child. Yay.
I think one dangerous, and this may be pure science fiction, but I mean, we've seen some crazy shit in the world, so someone may in fact try to do this. Do you think that there might be someone who may try to deny these artificial womb-born children right, so they could basically use them as slave labor or their private army?
Basically, lab grown tissue in human form so we can literally grow slaves. I mean, I'd be slightly more worried
I
about
mean,
the
it's super
eugenics.
messed up, but
I'm not denying that it's possible, and I'm not denying that it's even a semi-likely scenario. I'm more terrified of the possibility of eugenics, because even in the ad for the artificial womb that the powers that be are working on, they do say, like, you can decide on your child's intelligence or height or weight or whatever, and it's like that part is where I draw the line, and I'm like, like, in theory that's okay. In theory, like, I would like to make sure that my child is possibly even more intelligent than me, but I could see that going some weird eugenics places. And as someone who was born with a birth defect, you know, and a disability, I kind of resent the notion that we will get to a point where people would just choose not to have people with birth defects. And also, let's be real here, there's enough people who are afraid of things like autism or things like synesthesia that they might actually select out their own child's autism if they had the option, which,
Yeah,
aside from anything else, would possibly result in there being less special. Ironically, trying to create genetically perfect human beings might create less special people, not more.
that brings to mind a certain Austrian politician who had very similar ideas about this subject.
Springtime for and Germany. And lest we forget that we're also currently in the throes of a other certain German politician, Klaus Schwab, Guy Verhofstadt, etc. And of course, let's not forget the granddaddy of them all, George. I actually might have ties to the Nazi regime, Soros.
But yeah, that is deeply concerning because it would turn children into products, and that is just at that
Well,
point just
it
send them
it
nowhere.
also brings to mind what sort of what sort of I'm gonna play it safe and call it Magneto syndrome might happen if we have that much power over, like, what happens to the biologically grown normies when everyone grown in an artificial womb is like 7 feet tall and built like a brick shithouse with like a 300 IQ
I
to
think a
boot.
more accurate comparison would be in Gundam Seed, one of the worst Gundams ever made, but it specifically relates to this point. One of the core principles of that universe was that there are people who are born naturally called naturals, and then people who are had their genes genetically selected before they were born called coordinators. And a lot of people were upset because how is my child supposed to compete with someone who was genetically engineered for like art or music or sports?
And lest we forget the possibility that people might just actually start making Spartans and Space Marines, to reference both Halo and 40K. Like, what happens when the 8 foot
Will Henry
tall
Cavill finally reveal
six?
himself as the God Emperor of mankind?
I that I like if I must put my life in the hands of a God Emperor, tag team or like a gene splicing version of Elon Musk and Henry Cavill, I wouldn't mind. Like, that would I would be much more in favor of that than what's more likely in the current circumstances to happen, which is the bastard love child of freaking Shaquille O'Neal and Klaus Schwab, which might happen. Uh, dystopias.
Ah, Dalton, that brings to mind another good point. Like, if somebody's able to implant DNA from an individual to a blank sperm or egg, wouldn't that like increase the risk of paternity fraud? Because like you can get someone's DNA from a lot of different sources.
I mean, yes, but as per the aforementioned um, positive aspect of this, fraternity fraud might not mean as much if artificial wombs are a thing, because the mother might not have as much right to it, which would be good. So,
I mean, we can hope for that, but it is still a gynocentric society.
I mean, yes, but at the same time, I think there's enough red pillars out there between the MRAs, the PUAs, the anti-feminists, and etc. Not to mention the like Matt Walsh style traditionalists that there, and of course the high profile cases like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing and so on, that at the very least the gynocentrism would be tempered enough that we might end up with both aspects, i.e., there is still the paternity fraud angle, but there is also the your paternity fraud matters less because artificial wombs for the win. So I expect we'd wind up in a situation where we'd have both aspects of it, but they would essentially cancel each other out, which would be good. And if nothing else, the possibility of eugenically engineered Superman does improve my dating prospects. So
I
there's
mean,
that.
maybe, but I still think that
Also, I do wonder what the potential with regards to artificial wombs are with regards to cloning, because if let's say you're 80 years old and dying, but you can literally just create a genetic clone of yourself, and this part is more sci-fi, but eventually we might get to the point where we understand neurology well enough to go, okay, I can literally implant my memories of my entire life into this clone.
well, here's the thing though, Dalton. That you would essentially be copying yourself, but the you that is yourself would still die.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not a perfect situation, but having a me that has lived a full life and has another 80 years to basically improve to pick up where I started off from is still an appealing thing, even though there's the metaphysical angle of obviously it's two different souls or two different specific entities and so on. But even then, even if the clone kind of viewed itself as my son, it would still have the legacy of I have all these memories, I have all of his memories, and I have an entire 80 years worth of life experience, but I'm in a 20-year-old body or a 17-year-old body, so I have another 80 years to improve where he left off. That's still likely a thing in this. Like we're getting into the realms of this would be an interesting sci-fi premise sort of thing, but this technology does open up quite a few doors. Now, granted, some of them might get abused and some of them might get not taken advantage of because stupid things, but the potential is at least there. And like I said, were it not for Operation Paperclip allowing us to weaponize Nazi scientists, we might not have made it to the moon. And were it not for the medical travesties of the 20th century, we might not know as much as we know about medical science. I'm not therefore saying the ends justify the means. What I'm essentially saying is life is giving us lemons one way or the other, so we can either cut down all the lemon trees and scorch the earth, or we can try to make lemonade. I.e., the dystopian aristocrats that currently run the world are planning on making this artificial womb technology, and my best case scenario would be their goals crash and burn, but the technology is still around, and someone with the more libertarian leanings can make more positive use of it. Because just because Hitler advanced medical science in the name of eugenics doesn't mean we actually have to follow his lead. But we can take his technology and be like, your goals were stupid, but this technology is useful. Bye.
I feel like if I was ever to use this technology, it would be like a break glass in case of emergency situation because I'm someone who does want to, get married and have a wife and raise children that way. But in case if I never find a right woman to settle down with, I would still want to have children. So this would be a way for that to happen. So it's
and
like
and like I said,
kind
I'm
of a last
speaking.
resort thing for me personally.
Yeah, I'm more speaking as someone who, while I do broadly speaking consider myself bisexual, I have a massive bias in favor of men over women with regards to my romantic attachments, and I would like for me and my future husband to have the potential of having a child who is biologically connected to us. Now, I could probably accomplish the same thing with surrogacy to a degree, but the artificial womb has the potential of A, we don't need the surrogate, which means, we also don't need to worry about the agency of the surrogate as much, i.e., we don't have to convince a third person to get involved between the two of us. And B, with the artificial womb and the aforementioned, blank sperm or blank egg thing, you could have a child of same-sex parents who is biologically connected to both parents, which would be the ideal if it were possible. And of course, there's the potential for triggering the living fuck out of feminists, and the potential of, and this is how I think we'll ultimately get over the gynocentrism thing. There are a lot of aging feminists who, at the age of 40 or 50, are realizing, shit, I waited too long, or shit, I'm not as fertile as I used to be, or the women who got 3 or 4 different abortions and now are basically laboratory infertile, who might be able to still conceive children using the artificial womb technology. Granted, those people probably shouldn't morally have it, but I'm not really much of a moralizer. I'm in favor of, if I have to let my worst enemy have access to this in the name of letting everyone else who I don't hate having access to this, so be it. And it's probably more fair anyway.
I do. First of all, this technology triggering the feminists almost makes all of it worthwhile.
Yeah. Especially when you consider that it will trigger them and then they'll find a use for it and then they'll have to admit it's a good thing anyway, which is the best, which in my opinion is the best winning. Not only do we get to trigger the feminists, but we get to point out the hypocrisy when they start making use of it anyway.
But I do have to wonder about the cost of this technology, because even in vitro fertilization can be extremely expensive.
Yeah, there's that. And of course, with the powers that be currently being the ones funding it, who knows what ideological hoop we might have to, like, will there essentially be a biological version of the ESG score you'll have to deal with, if, assuming the current powers that be survive long enough to still have control over this technology, which honestly I'm betting they'll sabotage themselves just like the Nazis and other authoritarian regimes did long before this technology fully comes to fruition, and then someone will come along and go, their ideological motives were stupid, but this technology is still useful, so I'm going to take it and make it actually a good thing. Just like we did with Operation Paperclip, or like we did with the various medical travesties that ultimately led to advancement in medical science. Hopefully someday we'll get to the point where we don't have to commit travesties to advance the species, but apparently today is still not that day. Damn.
Regarding the biological ESG thing, I mean, it's insane and absolutely ridiculous. But if anybody was evil enough to do it, those people
Well,
are.
I mean, we're already seeing the you're not allowed to be a psychologist if you have the wrong views. Thank you, the re-education of Jordan Peterson, or you're not allowed to be considered a actual intellectual because of X, Y, and Z, or you're not allowed to work for, Marvel or DC Comics because you have the wrong political views. So what's going to stop them from, like, we can't let these people reproduce because they might reproduce bad people, or we can genetically modify the children so that they're more susceptible to our ideology. We can literally biologically engineer on top of social engineer people.
Regarding the whole Jordan Peterson thing, this just reminds me of my stance that if America really did need to expand in the late 17th century, we should have just invaded Canada.
Honestly, like I'm on the side of, why not just make all of, like, the entire American continent part of the USA? That's where I'm at with this.
Exactly.
Like Venezuela has proven
This,
not fit for purpose. Mexico is an open air shithole. Not speaking ill of the Mexican people, mind you, just the powers that be in Mexico are drug cartels and corrupt politicians who are in favor of drug cartels. So would would the American empire really be such a terrible thing at this point? Because
we
I'm leaning
guarantee them
towards
better human
no.
rights, and also if they're coming here anyway, what's the problem?
And I mean, Canada's lifestyle wouldn't really change much at all. We'd just depose Trudeau and
It'd probably
bring
be better in that regard.
bring Canada under the auspices of America. And if we annex Canada as part of the United States, they might bring some of their more enlightened policies along with them. Because if the country increases by a third, call me crazy, but I think some of their culture might merge with ours.
No more euthanizing.
Yeah. The maids, like I remember during our Duality of Men and Suicide conversation, I spoke up in favor of physician assisted suicide, and I'm still in favor of it. But again, it's one of those things of like, I'm in favor of it happening in general. I'm not in favor of the people who currently have control over it having control over it. Like I'm in favor of people having guns, but I'm not in favor of the mass shooter that's currently trying to shoot me having guns. It's sort of where I'm at with the whole maid situation. It's like physician
It's one
assisted
thing if you
suicide,
have
yes.
a
You having control of physician assisted suicide, hell no.
it's one thing if you have a terminal illness and you only have a short time left. It's another thing where you call a depression hotline because you're suffering from severe depression, and the person just tells you, "Why don't you just kill yourself?"
Yeah, no, it's and I would add to that, like, it's one thing if you're in abject misery, like such that we would have to lobotomize you to make you stop feeling pain. At that point, physician assisted suicide is perfectly. Or if, say, you have Alzheimer's and you're literally um, experiencing nothing but misery in your final years, that's one thing. But I'm
There was
suicidal.
literally there was
Have you
literally a
considered
situation.
actually committing suicide? Is not the right way around, especially not when you're
There was
otherwise
literally a
entirely
situation,
healthy.
Dalton, where a woman was trying to get medical treatment, but the Canadian healthcare system was so damn slow that instead, since we can't get you the treatment you need, we could euthanize you.
Yeah, or I have a illness that it's extremely difficult to treat. Well, we don't have the technology to treat you at the moment, so let's just decrease this. Like, we've literally gone full Ebenezer Scrooge pre-ghosts in this case, where it's like, if they are
Decreasing
to
the
die,
surplus
they should better
population. That
do
was
it and
literally my
decrease the
exact thought.
surplus population. And at that juncture, I'm sitting here with the ghost of Christmas present, like, maybe before you decide to decrease the surplus population, you should figure out who it is and where it is. Because if medical assistance in dying is a thing, I'd like to subject a few politicians to it. If, like, maybe this could be the modern version of the Sword of Damocles. Either you do your job as a politician, or we medically assist your death. That's the only viable
Wouldn't it be
use
great?
for this technology at this point. Like Trudeau, stop being the lapdog of the World Economic Forum, or you get medically assisted in dying.
Wouldn't it be great if all politicians literally had to sit under the sword of Damocles?
Yeah, like this is the medically viable, less messy version of the Sword of Damocles in a sane world. That's how we would be using this technology. Like,
Unfortunately, I mean, it's going to be so expensive when it initially comes out. I doubt that most people will even be able to, have access to it. I mean,
yeah,
maybe in like a
it'll be
century
another
it'll
50
come
years
back to.
before it's actually affordable, but even the possibility that I might live long enough to see it become a thing would be good, I think. And if not, then maybe my grandchildren might have access to the artificial womb, and they can look back and assuming that some version of this podcast still exists on the internet in 100 years, they can be like, oh, my grandpa was on the cutting edge of this idea, and he and his friend sat here and discussed it for like an hour. Someday.
Do you have any final thoughts on reproduction or this emerging technology?
Like I said, I'm not in favor of the people who want to make use of it, but many good technologies were basically the result of your ideological reason for creating this technology was fucking stupid and evil, but if someone who had a sane brain took it and made use of it, then we'd be off to the races. So do basically with this technology and Klaus Schwab what we did with Operation Paperclip. Do take the technical expertise, don't take the ideology. That is the correct answer.
My final thoughts would be that I definitely see the potential in this technology, but as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm worried about how this could impact the child physically and health wise, and also I I do worry that this could have a potentially negative impact on human relationships.
Honestly, at this point, I think
Um,
we're somewhat
Obviously, this
damned
wouldn't
if we
affect
do
people,
and
but
damned if we don't.
men
So
and women
I
kind of
say
relationships.
I say, if we're going to be damned anyway, we might as well be damned in a world that's slightly more positive than the world we're currently existing in. That's where I'm at with it.
Well, anyway, thank you everybody for listening. I have been Mystery.
And I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we have been the Duality of Man. Cheers, guys.
Bye, ready?